Welcome everyone to another great video. The evening, a time where most of us are probably going to be retiring back to our houses, enjoying whatnot. Well, you know, not stealing this from home, setting off the grid, but watch behind me here. We're where field meets forest. We're at elevation. We're getting closer to Halloween, and it's evening. It's like 5, 6 o'clock currently. But we're going to be reading more of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Now then, without further ado, let's get into it. The Wendigo. A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people have ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. He finally found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was Defago. I know I probably just butchered that, but you guys are just going to have to bear with me. Anyhow, they made a camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, and they had nothing to show for it. The third night, a windstorm came. Sorry, I thought I heard something. Let me see. Third night, a windstorm came. They lay in their tent, listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What the hunter saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring the wind, stirring the trees, were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it was calling Defago's name. Defago, it yelled. Defago. I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. Yeah, if his mind wasn't already lost. But Defago had gone out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. What's this all about? The hunter asked. It's nothing, Defago said. But the wind continued to call to him, and Defago became more tense and restless. Defago, it called. Defago. Suddenly, he jumped to his feet and he began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. You can't leave me out here, the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again, he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire." Then his voice faded and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. Hang on a minute. Tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down towards the lake, then onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken had gotten longer and longer. They were so long no human could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks to the middle of the lake, but then they disappeared. At first he thought Defago had fallen through the ice, but there was not any hole. Then he thought something had pulled him off into the ice. But that made no sense. As he stood wondering what happened, the wind began to call again. I don't know if you guys can see that, but those were the steps that Defago had taken out onto the ice when he had left the hunter. But the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard Defago screaming, My fiery feet! My burning feet! But there was nothing to be seen. Now, the hunter wanted to leave the place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left food for the Pogo and he started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. The following year, he went to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since. Maybe it was the Wendigo, one of them said and laughed. It's supposed to come out with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, though. And that's just what some of the Indians say. A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" The Indian still didn't answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. No answer. To get a better look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. Oh, that's cheery. What a nice way to end. That story, anyway. Anyhow, next up we have The Dead Man's Brains. Possibly. Hang on. Sorry about that, guys. That was just a game that you'd have to have more people to play, but let me get into it here. Next up, we have May I Carry Your Basket. For real this time. So then, May I Carry Your Basket? A young lad called Sam Lewis spent the evening playing chess at his friend's house. It was about midnight when they finished their game, and he started home. Outside, it was icy and cold, as quiet as the grave. As he came around a road, he was surprised to see a woman walking ahead of him. She was carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. When he caught up to her, he looked to see who it was, but she was bundled up against the cold. It was hard to see her face. "Good evening, miss," Sam said. "What brings you out so late?" But she didn't answer. Then he said, "May I carry your basket?" She handed it to him from under the cloth. A small voice said, "That's very kind of you." And that was followed by a wild laughter. Sam was startled, then he dropped the basket out and out rolled a woman's head. Ay, ay, ay. He looked at the head and he stared at the woman. "It's her head!" he cried. He started to run and the woman and her head began to chase him. Soon the head caught up to him. It bounded into the air and sunk its teeth into his left leg. Sam screamed with pain and ran faster, but the woman and her head stayed right behind Sam. Soon, the head leaped into the air again and bit the other leg. Then they were just gone. Gone. Poof. Vanished. Ah, that's Cherry. Hang on, guys. Now, next up we have The Hook. Not sure if you guys can see that. If you can't, you can pause and zoom in because I don't feel like getting up, to be honest. The Hook. Donald and Sarah went to the movies. Then they went for a ride in Donald's car. They parked up on a hill at the edge of town. From there, they could see the lights up and down the valley. Donald turned on the radio and found some music, but an announcer broke in with a news bulletin. "A murderer has just escaped the state prison. He was armed with a knife and was headed south on foot. His left hand was missing. In its place, he wore a hook." "Let's roll up the windows and lock the doors," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away," said Sarah. "Maybe we really should go home." "But it's only 10 o'clock," said Donald. "I don't care what time it is. I want to go home," Sarah said. "Look, Sarah," said Donald. "He's not going to climb all the way up here. Why would he do that? Even if he did, the doors are locked. How could he get in?" "You never underestimate a criminal." "Donald, he could take that hook and break it through a window and open the door," she said. "I'm scared. I want to go home." Donald was annoyed. "Girls are afraid of something," he said. As he started the car, Sarah thought she heard someone or something scratching at the door. "Did you hear that?" she asked as they roared away. "It sounded like somebody was trying to get in." "Oh, sure," Donald said. Soon they got to her house. "Would you like to come in and have some cocoa?" she asked. "No," he said. "I've got to go home." He went around to the other side of the car to let her out. Hanging on the door was a hook. That's freaky. Very freaky. So, I'm going to do a couple more for you this evening, and we'll get to it here. Next up, we have the white satin evening gown. A young man invited a young woman to a formal dance, but she was very poor and she could not afford to buy the evening gown she needed for such an occasion. "Maybe you can rent a dress," her mother said. So they went to a pawn shop not far from where she lived. Then she found a white satin evening gown in her size. She looked lovely in it, and she was able to rent it for very little. When she arrived at the dance with her friend, she was so attractive, everyone wanted to meet her. She danced again and again and again, and having a wonderful time, but she began to feel very dizzy and faint, and she asked her friend to take her home. "I think I have danced too much," she told him. When she got home, she lay down on her bed. The very next morning, her mother found that her daughter had died. The doctor did not understand what had caused her death, so he had the coroner perform an autopsy. The coroner found that she had been poisoned with embalming fluid. That's nice. It had stopped her blood from flowing. There were traces of the fluid on her dress. He decided it had entered her skin when she perspired while she was dancing. The pawnbroker said he bought the dress from an undertaker's helper. Undertaker. Mortician. Come on. It had been used in a funeral for another young woman, and the helper had stolen it just before she was buried. Sorry about that. Got a little tongue-tied. But seriously, though, that's sad, man. That is very, very sad. Anyhow, next up, we have a story called High Beams. So, the girl was driving the old blue sedan, was a senior at the high school. She lived on a farm about 8 miles away and used the car to drive back and forth. She had driven into town the night to see a basketball game. Now she was on her way home. As she pulled away from the school, she noticed a red pickup truck following her out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, the truck was still behind her. "I guess we're going to the same direction," she thought. She began to watch the truck in the mirror. When she changed her speed, the driver of the truck changed his speed. When she passed the car, so did he. Then he turned on his high beams, flooding her car with light. He left them on for almost a minute. "He probably wants to pass me," she thought. but she was becoming very uneasy. Usually she drove her car over a back road. Not too many people went that way, but when she turned onto that road, so did the truck. I've got to get away from him, she thought, and she began to drive faster. Then he turned his high beams on again. After a minute, he turned them off. Then he turned them on again and off again. She drove even faster, but the truck driver stayed right behind her. Then he turned his high beams on again. One more. Her car was ablaze with light. What is he doing? She wondered. What does he want? Then he turned them off again, but a minute later he had them back on, and he left them on. At last she pulled into her driveway, and the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped from the car and ran to the house. Call the police, she screamed. Hang on a minute here. Call the police, she screamed at her father. Out in the driveway, she could see the driver of the truck. He had a gun in his hand. When the police arrived, they started to arrest him, but he pointed to the girl's car. You don't want me, he said. You want him. Crouched behind the driver's seat, there was a man with a knife. As the driver of the truck explained, the man slipped into the girl's car just before she left the school. Ugh. He saw it happen, but there was no way he could stop it. He thought about getting the police, but he was afraid to leave her, so he followed the car. Each time the man in the back seat reached up to overpower her, the driver of the truck turned on his high beams. Then the man dropped down, afraid that someone might see him. What does that tell you right there? We have guardians. Guardians in places that you might not think. Guardians in places that you might not see immediately. But that right there, high beams, that is the reason. We have guardians, I'm telling you. That's probably my new favorite short story in this book. So, do one more here this evening, because I don't know what exactly this has been going on at now. As a matter of fact, let me just look real quick here. So, 1742. Yeah, we're going to do one more for you this evening. Oh! And this one is called The Babysitter. Okay. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everybody was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There were Richard, Brian, Jenny, Doreen, and Doreen, the babysitter. The telephone rang. Maybe it's your mother, said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man laughed hysterically and hung up. Who was it? Asked Richard. Some nut, said Doreen. What did I miss? At 9:30, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. It was the same man who called before. I'll be there soon, he said, and laughed and hung up. Who was that? The children asked. Some crazy person, she said. About 10 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Jenny got to it first. Hello, she said. It was the same man. 1 more hour, he said, and he laughed and hung up. He said 1 more hour. What did he mean? He asked Jenny. Don't worry, said Doreen. It's somebody fooling around. I'm scared, said Jenny. About 10:30, the telephone rang once more. When Doreen picked it up, the man said, Pretty soon now, and he laughed. Why are you doing this? Doreen screamed, and he hung up. Was it the guy again? Asked Brian. Yes, said Doreen. I'm going to call the operator and complain. The operator told her to call back if it happened again. Sorry, the operator told her to call back if it happened again, and she would trace the call. At 11 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. Very soon now, the man said. He laughed and hung up. Doreen called the operator. Almost at once, she called back. The person is calling you from the upstairs telephone. You gotta be kidding me. She said, you better leave. I'll get the police. Just then, a door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started down the stairs towards them as they ran from the house. He was smiling in a very strange and sadistic way. A few minutes later, the police found him and arrested him. Good. Serves them right. Serves him right. Freaking weirdo. Anyhow, hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely wanting to do at least one more of these for this creepy Halloween season. But that's going to have to wait. If you guys did enjoy, make sure you hit subscribe, like. Channels were doing really good, might I add. Take care, everyone.